welcome to everybody who's come along on a sunny day when you could be having lunch to come to not another diversity panel, controversially named. And clearly, there have been quite a few diversity panels in the past, and part of what we might be discussing today is how to make sure we don't need to have diversity panels at some point in the future. But first of all, to introduce myself, I'm Anne Morrison. I'm a board member of Women in Film and Television and ex-chair of BAFTA. Most of my career was in the BBC running documentaries and factual entertainment there. So we've got a fantastic panel with us today, and I'm going to get them each to introduce themselves in just a minute. But before I do so, I'd like to say big thanks to Channel 4 for sponsoring this session. And to talk just a little bit about why we still need to talk about diversity. In some ways, it seems like there's never been so much chat about it. But in other ways, we're really not where we need to be. And it's worth saying at the outset that also diversity and inclusion is such a massive topic that in an hour and a quarter that we have ahead of us, we can't hope to do justice to every single aspect of it. So we're going to be focusing in particular on class, which is actually a diversity topic that doesn't get so much attention. Class and ethnicity and gender. So we won't be addressing in particular disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. But of course, all of these things intersect, as we know. So we may well be covering topics which cut right across all the diversity issues. So looking at kind of where we are now, there's a recent bit of research on the creative industries, the Panic report, which found that people from working class origins in film, TV and radio amount to 12.4%. And that's against a population of about 30% in that category. Black and ethnic minority people in film, TV and radio, some reports have found that that's as low as 4.2% rather than 14% in the overall population. And I think another aspect of that is that we know that, it's a very London-centric industry, these industries, and in London, it's almost at 40% BAME. So it's even more disproportionate if you take that into account. And women, despite, all the talk, women are still only comprising 13% of directors. And around 14% of screenwriters. So, and that's been pretty stable. So for people who say, just wait for evolution, things are going to get better, there doesn't seem to be a lot of progress on that. We've heard a lot about the gender pay gap, of course, and all of these things then, of course, come into representation on screen and the view we have of ourselves as a society reflected on screen. And these are the eyes through which we see the world. So it leads to some kind of strange anomalies, such as 16% of doctors on screen are female. But in society, 52% of doctors are female. So, it's a very distorted view that this demographic kind of translates into on screen. So we're going to have a conversation here and then turn it open to all of you for questions. So please do be thinking of questions. We'll leave at least the last 15 to 20 minutes for your questions to the panel. So without more ado, I'm going to turn to Jaimie here and then just move along and get each of you to just briefly, if you would, introduce yourselves and talk about how your particular background might have impacted on your career so far.
Hi, I'm Jaimie de Cruz. I run Acme Films, which is a small independent production company. We've been going for about 7 years. For me, my background before television was really relevant to my TV career because I was involved in running a black music magazine, which was an independent publication, and so I had the good fortune to kind of build very good relationships, access, talent, knowledge, and a wide range of people who were around me and knew about stories that weren't being told on television. And so my entry into television was to try and get those stories told. And since then, with kind of varying degrees of success, because a lot of those ideas that I thought were amazing and fascinating and interesting and weren't on television, so everyone would be falling over themselves to commission them. Actually didn't quite go like that. But since then we've done a lot of content in the space of music culture, access to stories, to communities from where stories aren't being told, and that's kind of been our sort of main speciality.
Great, thank you.
My name's Clare Richards. I'm a freelance director. I make singles and series, and I've been doing so for the past sort of 10, 12 years. I got a scheme for first-time directors back in 2006, which is called Fresh. I had an idea and I got that commissioned, and that was my first directing gig, and I've managed to carry on directing since then, which is 12 odd years later. And I think that it's not that you can't be a successful female director, it feels like it's sort of longer and harder one, and there aren't enough of us around.
Oh, me, yes, hello. My name's Ramy. I'm a commissioning exec at Channel 4. I work in daytime and features, but prior to that I was overseeing on-screen talent at the channel, so that was working across all genres to ensure that there was enough diverse talent on screen, essentially. I was brought up on a council estate in Waterloo in South London. My dad was a cook in a greasy spoon, and my mum was a waitress. And then we moved to the suburbs, and then I got an assisted financial place for boarding school, basically. So if your parents were divorced and they couldn't financially afford to send you to school, the school that I went to paid for my fees. So I kind of feel like I've seen a bit of both sides of the coin, really. And then I just sort of got into television. I got work experience at ITV and kind of just worked up from there. And I think, much like the other chaps have already said, I kind of wanted to see a world reflected on screen that looked a little similar to me. So me growing up, I was obsessed with Desmond's, and those were the shows that kind of really spoke to me, and that's why I wanted to get into telly, and also to impress girls, but that's another story. So that's me, pretty much. Tom?
Hello, I'm Tom McDonald. I am the head of commissioning for Specialist Factual at the BBC. I'm very conscious that I am a white man with quite a posh-sounding accent on this panel. But anyway, so my background is I'm originally from Bradford, just up the road. I'm from a very working-class background. My mum was a dinner lady and my dad was a door repairman. And I then went to university at Cambridge on a full grant and with a hardship grant too. So I guess for me, part of the reason that I wanted to be on this panel and talk about class is that, I think in some ways my life straddles two worlds, one which is the world of sort of the northern working classes, the other is a world of privilege, and I think Oxbridge has become a sort of byword for privilege in telly. I mean, in terms of why I got into telly, very quickly, I think TV for me did two things when I was growing up. The first is it reflected my world back at me, which I think is incredibly important, but also it showed me the rest of the world, and it was my sort of gateway to, whilst other people may have been able to travel around the world or see other parts of the world, for me television sort of gave me the rest of the world. So I'm interested in how television can do both those things, sort of show you yourself and the society we live in and take you somewhere else.
Rita?
I'm Rita Daniels. I'm a commissioning executive at Channel 4. I look after a strand called First Cut Strand, which is for new directors. I'm also across a variety of returning series, like First Dates Hotel, 24 Hours in A&E, and the Educating series. Interestingly, I was working at Channel 4 as an assistant 18 years ago, and I think that perhaps my race and ethnicity helped me get my first job. I was working as an assistant and came across Stuart Cosgrove, who was the then Controller of Arts and Entertainment, and he suggested I went and worked on a black music show. That company was a company called Brighter Pictures, and it was owned by a gay guy who hadn't been to university. He was married to a white guy he was the first in his family to go to university. And the whole company was diverse. I mean, there was Asians, sons of cleaners, Cambridge, trans, before it became a thing, Asians, a lot of us. So I didn't realise that actually class was ever going to be an issue for me. And luckily I stayed there long enough to rack up a lot of credits so that when I left there, I didn't feel quite as... my struggle wasn't quite as hard as it has been for other people. So that was quite interesting. I mean, that's kind of my story, really.
Fantastic. Well, a great panel with lots of life experience to be able to bring to this topic, as well as work experience. Let's address this issue of class, because I think it is one, as I say, which gets less attention than some other topics within diversity. And it is, in a way, a kind of overarching issue which goes across so much of the industry and intersects with all other forms of diversity. I mean, it's an industry which notoriously is very hard to get into, and that relies on unpaid work experience very often to get in. But then when you're in, particularly in the early stages, you could argue it's a very precarious profession now, and probably even more than it used to be. What's the impact of that if you don't have the bank of mum and dad to be able to fund you in between contracts?
You might have to take jobs that you wouldn't otherwise have taken, so your CV becomes diluted because you've got to keep the lights on and pay the bills. But some decision makers can see that as a CV that they're not quite attracted to. So some people can wait a year to make their amazing film, but other people have to work and pay their mortgage or their rent.
I think that issue it certainly feels to me that issue, and I'm going to sound like an old man now, but that issue has become sort of more and more acute. So when I first moved to London, my first job was, I had a 12-week contract, I think it was, at October Films. That's the first place that I worked. I remember really well that I was paid £350 a week, which seemed like a huge amount of money to me. But my rent was around £350 a month. So if you do the maths, like basically you can just about get by in London. And, my parents thought I was completely insane moving to London for a 30-week contract, but, luck of the youth, just sort of did it. You talk to people now, and my partner's brother is around that age. You talk to people now about what their rent is, and rent has gone up exponentially at the same time as television wages really haven't. And we know that we're still in a culture where there are unpaid internships, or there are internships which are paying just sort of, your travel and your food. And I sort of go, something is fundamentally not working at that entry-level point because, and it's not just a London issue, this is true of Manchester or Glasgow or Belfast. They're expensive cities, not as expensive as London. But I think we all have to sort of accept that we can all sit here and go, we really want a broad spectrum of people, we want social diversity across television, but it is potentially a very deeply unattractive industry if the wages stay as low as they are, if the contracts stay as precarious as they are, and if cost of living stays where it is. So I think there's a genuine issue.
Yeah, I mean, just to second that, my first job was at ITV, and they only paid for my travel. And there's no way that I would have stayed in television had my mum not been living in the burbs so I could commute. And even then, I was working in a clothes shop as well, just to have a bit of extra money. So, even though I still had somewhere to live rent-free, I still had to have another job just to get by. So I can't imagine what it's like for a sort of 21-year-old coming out of uni now to want to work in this industry.
So in a way, from what you're saying, it's likely to get worse unless we find...
Well, the cost of living's going up every year, and like Tom said, the wages haven't. So absolutely, it's not going to get any better anytime soon.
Is there any way of counteracting this? I mean, there are obviously a number of schemes that give people some funding, but it's still quite patchy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unpaid internships should be illegal as far as I'm
I think they are illegal.
Oh, well, there we go. I did it!
It's our first victory. Yeah.
So that's good news. Anyone else?
The thing is, though, we all know that versions of unpaid internships do still happen. I mean, one of the things, I work quite a lot with the Grierson Trust, who have a mentor scheme every year. I think I've seen some of the people who've been through that scheme here in the audience today. And one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time is the replacements that happen with independent production companies, but how do we get to a place where those placements become longer, more sustainable? How can broadcasters and indies work together to make sure that either you're topping up people's wages or you're covering people's wages for a period of time where actually a 6-month contract would allow someone to move to London, set up, get there, or to Manchester or Glasgow or Belfast, and get those credits on their CV so that they then become attractive. Because to Rita's point, it's very difficult. You know, you look at a CV, and CVs, when you're looking at a CV and you're very busy and you're a commissioner, you're not going, oh, they probably had to have that break because they couldn't afford to wait for the next job. You read it as, well, that's what their credits are. So I think part of the issue is sort of, we can talk about the sort of commissioner exec end of the spectrum, but at the sort of entry-level end of the spectrum, I think what needs to happen is actually very, very practical, which is this is essentially a financial issue. There are loads of people who want to work in telly and the media. Lots of people don't know how to do it, and that's another issue. But loads of people choose not to do it because it's unaffordable.
But also, let's not get it twisted. A lot of these internships are being given to the CEO's, a nephew or son or daughter's boyfriend, and so there needs to be a real sort of exploration into how we can stop that happening, because it's all very well saying unpaid internships are illegal, which I've just found out, but it's still not a meritocracy, even at the very bottom.
No, I think we can agree on that. And certainly work experience as opposed to internships, which can often be up to a month and are unpaid. And sometimes there is still abuse of that. And sometimes people feel they've got to do, one on top of another, which actually adds up to, 6 months or a year of getting nothing really in the way of wages. So I think it's obviously a practice which still sort of persists. I mean, let's move on to, if you do manage to find your way into the industry, the kind of, should we call it sort of cultural assimilation that needs to take place, because there are kind of rules to this game, aren't there, that you have to adopt in order to be seen as being like others and the sort of person that people want to promote and back. So what have people's experiences been of that? I mean, obviously, Tom, you mentioned when going to Cambridge from a working class northern background, and I noticed when I mentioned that you were on this panel, people were going, "Why is Tom McDonald on this panel? He sounds so posh, and he's a white man." So obviously you've
It's called etiquette classes. It's been amazing.
So tell us about your etiquette classes.
It's interesting because I would say that Cambridge was much more of a culture shock for me than television, which Cambridge preceded my television career, so it's no surprise. But, I remember when I first went to university, and this sounds like a lie, it's not a lie, I did not know that spaghetti didn't come out of a tin. And I remember really well sort of someone making spaghetti and me going, God, it's not covered in tomato sauce out of a tin. Yeah. I didn't know what hummus was. I didn't know what a bloody avocado was. So actually, that was a sort of brutal learning curve of going, okay, I thought the way that I lived and grew up was the way that everyone lived and grew up. We're going to be talking about things on this panel which are about state school versus public school. I didn't know public schools existed. I knew sort of what Eton was, but I didn't know what it really was. I didn't realise it meant you paid loads of money to send your kids there. I just thought it was sort of posh people going to a posh school. So when I went to Cambridge, I think, look, I didn't intentionally go to survive here, you assimilate. That's not how it felt, actually. It was more, I realised that there was a different world out there, and most of the people who I was surrounded by at university were from a different world to me. And when I was going home to Bradford at the weekend, they were going skiing. Sort of like, I still haven't been skiing, just to make a point. I'm not going bloody skiing.
That's your protest.
I might have lost my accent, but I'm not going skiing. So when I went into television, I guess I didn't walk into television thinking I now have all the tools of the trade to survive in British television. But what I would say is that what Cambridge gives you, and I'm sure other universities give you this, but what Cambridge gave me was a sort of social capital and confidence. When I think about Cambridge encouraged me, and I can only speak to Cambridge, not of universities, but to share my opinions. My opinions were valid. What I believed in mattered. You're around people who are very vocal, argumentative, clever. And so to walk into television where you're expected to have an opinion, be able to write development treatments, all those things, that really, really helps. I think the downside to that when we're talking about assimilation is that there is I think we should all acknowledge that there is a particular way that people talk about ideas. When I think about people coming in to pitch ideas to me, they could be pitching a reality show And there will be cultural references which are literary, from the world of art, which actually aren't necessarily relevant to the reality show that we're talking about, but they're sort of cultural touchstones that people expect you to know and understand. And so I haven't had anything in television which is as embarrassing as the What's an Avocado, but I am very aware that this industry can feel like, especially in London, an echo chamber where we talk about the same things. We live in this. My sister was down the other week and we're out with friends, and everybody was talking about where they live in London and how much their house cost. And she literally was like, all everyone in London talks about is London. And it's sort of true, right? Londoners talk about London. I'm sure people in Bradford, my memory is people in Bradford don't talk about Bradford as much as people in London talk about London. So I think there are all sorts of sort of invisible barriers, and one of the reasons that I really want to talk about this is that I obviously think it's extraordinary and brilliant that there are targets across broadcasters for BME, for gender, etc., etc. We don't have targets for class, and I think part of that is class is a very, very hard thing to define. But one of the things that I'm really worried, one of the things that genuinely worries me personally is it sort of the elephant in the room that we're leaving because we're not addressing class because it's harder to address, that we're going to leave people behind.
And what about this issue, just picking up that point about setting of targets? Ramy, you were involved with the Channel 4 diversity and so on. What do you find is there a way of setting targets for this kind of area?
Social, it's really tricky, is the honest answer. I think it's a lot easier to sort of measure targets when you talk about disability or ethnicity or gender. With social class, you can't. And in terms of targets, I kind of agree with Tom. But in terms of, some people have a problem with targets. I think targets exist because nothing's changed enough, quickly enough in the last 20 years. So I think they're a necessary evil. We want to get to a stage where, we don't need targets. But the reality is sort of, 20 years ago when people were, I think it was Greg Dyke was saying something at the BBC about it was hideously white. And we're still sat on a panel in Sheffield 20 years later talking about diversity. And it's a whole new industry that's just come out of the blue. So I think targets exist because we haven't done enough already.
The targets aren't going to solve it, I don't think. And I think it's interesting that there is an understanding that the kind of Oxbridge confidence does open up the pathway. And for Tom, you're talking about, imagine if you'd gone into telly without having that gateway, that kind of learning experience. But what I find interesting is that a lot of the values, confidence, knowledge, attitude that come from not those worlds are just not valued. So I don't think we should allow ourselves to think that without being able to have the access to the public school, the Oxbridge, the debating society, the banter in the bar. I mean, all those social codes are like hugely important. But there are so many amazing people with confidence, intelligence, great ideas, and they are just seen as other in some way. So what would be clever and confident for someone from that background will be seen as maybe bolshy, full of attitude and a bit cocky, or even the sort of chip on the shoulder. And so those kind of things that are in your advantage, if you're from that background, actually become to your disadvantage. And I think it was also really interesting with the research that Dr. Friedman did. That was commissioned by you, right? The Channel 4 research. And he talked about the social codes, the unspoken social codes. And I think the most interesting one, two of them relate to the work experience thing, which is the bank of mum and dad and informal sponsorship, which is essentially networks. But the other thing is studied informality, which is basically the secret code of
fitting in,
literary references, being ironic in the right way.
Playing the game, basically.
Playing the game, yeah.
Yeah, I've had mentees in the BBC who are sort of freaked out by the fact that you call the Director General if you meet him in the lip Tony. Which seems as if there's so informal, there's no rules at all, we're all just in first name terms. but then getting completely flummoxed because they hadn't noticed that there are certain people you're not actually supposed to speak to in the lift, you know, and that's harder to spot because it's not
I don't know
explicit.
if anyone taught me these codes. I'm really worried.
We should have a chat afterwards.
Yeah, but it's interesting what you're saying, Jaimie, because I know, and this is not true. So first of all, I think I should say, I don't think any of the people sitting on this panel think that we're the only people in the industry who are different. You know, it isn't as simple as that. But both within the job that I do now and outside of the job I did when I was in the independent production sector, just thinking about the North for a second, I've heard people talk about the North they use the word North to mean poor.
Yeah.
You know, and you sort of go, Jesus, that's quite scary to me. I've heard people talk about the North to mean...
Is there a Pret down there?
Yeah, is there a Pret down there? You still get the whippet joke. Do you know what I mean? If you say that you're from Yorkshire, yeah. I think I've been in meetings where we talk about where people have talked about what northern people like to watch on television, as though they're a completely different species. And the thing is that these things are benign. You know, it's benign. This is not no one's aggressively going, we're horrible southerners who don't like northerners. Actually, everyone's trying to go, this is a proportion of the audience that historically the BBC has a complex relationship with. You know, when I was growing up, I was an ITV person because you're northern, so you watch Coronation Street. Do you know what I mean? That's your get. Granada was a sort of extraordinary thing down the road when I was growing up. But so people aren't saying it to be mean, but
no.
But it's a
they just don't know enough different people, do they?
Exactly, and it's a descriptor that if you applied it to other social groups in the UK would no longer be acceptable. But that sort of hilarious northern bias, or that hilarious sort of, they're poor up north, thing still exists.
Completely. And I remember, people doing academic studies into working class people in order to see what they might want to watch. And it was very much, let's study these people rather than that we are these people in any way. But Clare, I wanted to come to you because I think the issue of confidence is a really interesting one if you're outside the kind of prevailing demographic, whether that's in gender terms or class or anything else. How does the confidence issue and being seen to be overly confident sometimes as a woman maybe play in?
I think that on the whole, I don't want to sort of get stuck in sort of stereotypes. It's quite hard to unpick some of this stuff that sort of men are like this and women are like that. But I do think on the whole, women can present less confidently, and that's seen as therefore you're more of a risk. And execs have talked to me about where, if they interview a woman for a directing role, that they're more likely to say that bring up the skills that they can't do, as opposed to sort of oversell the ones that they oversell themselves. So. I go back to that thing about sort of what do we value, like how we need to sort of understand that people bring different qualities and that value them in the same way. And often there's that word sort of bossy is used for women, isn't it? And that's seen as negative.
You never have a bossy man, do you? It's not a word that's ever applied to men, really, yeah.
It's okay to be assertive as a male, but not so much as a female.
No, I think it's interesting as to why that has happened, why women very often do have that sort of lack of confidence, or at some level, even if they're masking it, that because if they do present as super confident, then it sometimes goes against them. So it's not just irrational as to why they would be in a certain way. I think being outside that demographic is very tricky. So in terms of how we think this is going to change, because I think we've kind of diagnosed this issue, in terms of class and backgrounds which are different from the kind of prevailing demographic. What do we do to make it a more welcoming place to people of all classes?
I think we just need to mix our teams up. I think it's quite obvious. I'm really interested in difference. I appreciate it. I think we should celebrate it. And I don't think that I need to be in a room where everyone sounds the same, because it means that the person that doesn't sound the same as everyone else is going to have will have a voice but won't use it. So I just think we shouldn't just hire our own, people that look just like us. It's quite simple.
How do we get people to do that, though? Because I agree, and I think
as commissioners we need to be really much stricter about it. And I think, and allow people to fail more as well. I don't think that... It's interesting that when a diverse person fails once, they're written off. But, you know, posh white boys can go on to do great things and eventually get a BAFTA because they've been sponsored and pushed up the ladder.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to, you know, work on making sure that everyone else gets a bit of the pie.
Let's talk about this issue of sponsorship, because I do think that is kind of, you know, does come up as one of the solutions, which is partly mentorship. You know, obviously Women in Film and TV that I'm involved with has a mentoring scheme, you know, for mid-career women, because sometimes you can get in, but it's the retention that's the issue, or returning after childbearing. But, you know, people who've got on well have very often had powerful sponsors. And is that down to how do you acquire these people? How do you get somebody who's going to really sponsor you? Is there something you need to do to get that?
I think I was lucky, actually, because when I started out, my best work was probably at RD, well, actually, Brighter Pictures. I did a couple of years with them, and they didn't stereotype me. They let me do low arts, high arts, docs, Fat 10. And then by the time I came out of there, I had a CV that you couldn't really challenge.
Uh-huh.
And then I went on to work at RDF and, you know, found Jonathan Smith, Stephen Lambert, and they were sort of pushing me to direct in a way that, I mean, if I hadn't met them, I think I'd probably still be struggling a bit. But they recognise talent and push it, so I think we have to do that too. And I do quite a lot with young talent. I do First Cut, and I also mentor women on the side informally and help them, you know, help to push them up the ladder. So I think we need to take a bit more responsibility.
Claire?
Yeah, I recently just thought to myself, I was away on holiday, and I thought, I want to be doing something about this. I want to help make a difference and support younger female directors, and I sort of do it, as I go along anyway. But I've recently set up a group that is well supported by really experienced female execs and sort of midpoint career directors, and then some young female producers hoping to get into directing, and sort of those or directors who have just got those first couple of jobs. And I think, you know, I feel sort of looking back that you sort of have to sort of make your own luck all the time, and you have to be constantly sort of quite dogged about it. And it does help to have people on your side, but that doesn't always happen. So if I think that if we are able to support and help people at making decisions really early in their career, then it gives you the confidence to sort of know where to go and where to look and fit. So, you know, if there are any young female directors out here, then come and find me afterwards, because I'm...
That sounds like a good offer. Yeah, it really does.
I was having an interesting conversation with Yen, who runs the outreach programme for Grierson, yesterday, and one of the things she said, and I thought this really struck me, is that a lot of young people who are not from the sort of obvious TV backgrounds don't even know where to find the paid internships or the work experience in the first place. And I think we, all the people sitting here, and people sitting out here who have positions of responsibility, I think maybe we need to be less passive about it. I think part of it is, yes, when Rita's right, when you have a commission and people are crewing up, you can go, we really want to find people from diverse backgrounds. But one of the things that Yen was suggesting, which I thought was really interesting, is should we be doing more outreach in schools all over the UK? Should we actually be seeking people rather than expecting them to find their way through the labyrinth of how television works? Do we have to go out, literally go out there to go, we're here, and this is an industry that might work for you?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because there's almost like an oversupply of people trying to get into the industry, but not necessarily representative of the country.
And I think that goes back to what I think that goes back to what we were talking about with, internships paid, which are led by, which are the CEO's daughter, the cliche of the CEO's daughter.
But also, people think that you have to have worked in telly to work in telly. Back in the day, people were coming from advertising, from music, from all different walks of life. So there needs to be a way to tap into different forms of creativity, because it's all just content at the end of the day. So there needs to be a sense that we're kind of not looking and swimming in the same pool of talent, and we kind of have to expand our net as wide as possible. And that's the only way you're really going to change the demographic. And also, it definitely needs to be people in authority who are the key decision makers have to look like the world that we're trying to represent.
Yeah, because ultimately it's systemic, isn't it? And so, for me, speaking to someone who runs an independent production company, like we take the risks all day long. I can hire. My team's very diverse from class, race, and gender, and we do that all day long. But that isn't valued at the top. So why are we doing that when the gatekeepers, don't actually see the value of that? And we have to believe that that's going to an outlet, because I actually find it can be counterproductive when I get approached by a lot of people who don't have access to TV, and probably because of some of the things we do, they might assume that we might be a way in, but I have to be real with them and say, well, you can come into this world, but it's the top, it's the blockage at the top, and the people that run things, the gatekeepers, do not value what a lot of people are doing. So I think it has to be it has to be systemic change, not just from the bottom.
And what would you say, Jaimie, are the kind of consequences of the people at the top not dealing with this issue? I mean, what's the threat to them?
Well, for them, I think it's their loss, and actually, I think this panel has got a very good title, Not Another Diversity Panel. I've been on diversity panels for God knows how long, and it's kind of depressing. But I think the thing that's changed now, fundamentally, they can set targets, they can wring their hands and say what they ought to do. But now I think it's an existential crisis for them, because the people that run things are going to be unemployed. Right. Television's not going to exist. It's already dying, and right now they need... No, but it's true. Basically, what I'm saying is it's gone from a question of ethics, it's gone to a question of practicalities. And if I was running a network now, I'd be like doing everything I could to reach out to... I'd be watching, Michael Dapper getting 300 million views on YouTube and saying, get him on my channel now, not when people like me pitch him go, who? Mm-hmm. And I know I'm crossing into the racing, and we're still talking about class. But I'm just saying that you need to believe that the people that you are fundamentally trying to sell your products, your programs to, care, and that's why I say it's existential for them now, because 10 years ago it was still about we really ought to do that because it's the right thing to do, and now I think that they are missing out hugely on the young audience. They're just abandoning TV. And the amount of platforms that exist for them. I mean, a lot of the young people I speak to who are already successful on other platforms, what am I really offering them? I'm offering to take them onto a network that will tell them what to do, that will, develop their idea that's already successful, that will basically take the soul and the originality out of what they're doing. And if I don't believe that if I can't take them to a network that's going to actually help them, then why am I talking to them?
Okay, so we've got existential crisis. I mean, let's develop the theme of race more. But Carrie,
just
pick
really
up
quickly,
that.
I kind of agree with Jaimie, and I shouldn't because I work at Channel 4. But I think the point is that it's easy enough to make the moral argument, but if you sell it as a commercial necessity, then that's actually a lot easier sell to the people at the top. So when you work in a big company, you need allies, and you need people who are never going to... There are going to be people that never are going to fucking change. They're just not going to change. They've lived that life for 50 years. They love their corner office. They don't want to rock the boat. They're happy with their pension. But you need some allies. But the best way to sell to the people that might not get it is to give the commercial argument for it. And I think once people start realising that Michael Dapper is getting 1 billion views on YouTube, or Chicken Connoisseur is regularly getting 3 million every week, then that is a far easier sell than the moral argument. And I think we need to be pushing that more. And, it's not ideal, because it's, morally, it's written into our remit, so we should be doing it anyway.
I know, but some people see it as an irritant.
But some people see it as an irritant, exactly. So if you can sell the commercial argument as to why we should be doing it, then you're going to win that battle.
So it's absolutely essential that they grapple with this. Do you think that they have realised that yet, or is that...
Well, I think you only have to... If you look, look at Black Panther, for God's sake. I mean, it's one of the biggest films ever made in America. Or you look at, Fast and Furious takes over $1 billion at the box office. It's got the most racially diverse cast in Hollywood cinema. Do you know what I mean?
The audience are ahead.
The audience are ahead of the game. Like, seriously, they're ahead of the game. And I think we talked about it earlier in was that a green room? I don't know what it was. It was like a space near a toilet.
The way to the men's toilets.
In the men's toilet.
In a reception area. I'm trying to get all bougie, but it's not working. But I can't remember what I was saying now. I'm sure it was a brilliant point.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant anyway. No, absolutely. I mean, developing the themes around race, though, I mean, you do hear still people saying, well, we can either get the best talent or we can get the most diverse talent. And there is, seriously, it still happens. And there is that sense of these are two separate things. How do we harness that and, some enthusiasm for people who are at the top of these organisations, very often are white and male and privileged, to get behind this with conviction as opposed to lip service?
Well, I think it's about understanding that you have to sort of take risks, and that if they were to better understand that, then maybe there would be a better sort of output and more diverse range of people and more voices. But
I think risk is such an interesting topic, isn't it? Because the perception of risk is so much greater around some people than others. And how do you think, what have you seen, any of you, that enables people to come to terms with what they perceive as a risk, that mitigates the risk, so that they will take that leap of faith, which is more difficult?
They'll take the leap of faith when someone they already trust tells them it. That's what they'll do. They will only, and I say they as if there's this kind of Illuminati type, or but which it kind of is. But I do think that we're caught in a really terrible sort of feedback loop, kind of echo chamber, where everyone who run, the controllers. And some of the commissioning editors, not the ones on this table, but some of the people that are basically, they are saying they want to change, but when the change is right in front of them, they don't understand what that idea means.
But I mean, a part of this, I think, when we talk about risk is a word that comes up in television a lot in lots of different contexts, and I think one of the things is that when that sentence, which sounds awful, that you're saying you've heard, actually, again, I think there's a sort of benign explanation. Let me sort of finish what I say, which is that what they're really talking about is experience. There's a director that they know and has credits already on the BBC or Channel 4. There's a director they don't know who doesn't have those credits. The preference would, and you can see there's a logic to it. You just look at it cold and going, we'll go with the experienced person. So what do you do about it? Well, sort of, we as a department, so the Specialist Factual Department, have started to do, sort of put our money where our mouth is, which is, so we commissioned a film recently, Fatima in my team, she's in the audience, commissioned a film called Islam, Women and Me, with a new on-screen talent called Maureen Baig. The director on that film had not directed a full film before. So we put more money into the film so that the edit could be longer. It's really, really practical. Because we're risk averse, because everyone wants a brilliant film at the end of it, we decided up front to go, if this were an experienced director, this film might take 6 weeks to cut. With an inexperienced director, it's going to take longer, and what we don't want is to feel that this edit is in crisis because it's an inexperienced person. So I think you can do things which are really practical, which is go, if you want this if we're going to champion this person, we should make sure they have the resource behind them to do it well and properly, rather than do the opposite thing, which Rita mentioned earlier, which is that you get your first directing credit, you cock it up because you're under loads of pressure, and you don't get the shot again. Sure. So part of it is about creating the space for, and this doesn't have to be AME people, but it's creating the space for emerging female directors, emerging gay directors, emerging...
tell them as well. Get
exactly.
Really good execs and amazing editors, and just work, give them feedback, help them to grow rather than just leave them to fail.
And that's what First Cut over the years has done brilliantly. It's what the BBC Fresh scheme over the years has done brilliantly as well. And part of the reason that we're able to do it as a department is we commission films at 10:45 on BBC One, so they get a credit on peak time BBC One. They're slightly lower budget, slightly less high profile than a 9 o'clock show, but you're still on BBC One, and hopefully that credit is the launch pad that gets you your next directing gig. So it's trying to do things that are genuinely practical rather than just talking about it.
But also, why wouldn't you want to take risk? We work in a creative industry, and if we're all sat in a room and we all agree with each other, and that's really dangerous for creativity. You need to come out of that room and just fucking arguing, because that is basically what's going to make better telly at the end of the day. And the ratings aren't what they used to be, so there is no reason not to be taking chance on new, uncapped, sort of fresh talent, I would argue.
I think that's true, but I think the other thing is we all know this, that when you're in the good times, if you're in sort of clover, and if the ratings were going up and up and up and up and up, I've not lived through that era of television, by the way, but others might have, is that... I'm sure people would feel more open to risk. I think the really difficult thing is when there's a perception that things aren't working. And also, we all know that we're still in broadcast television, still caught in that very odd world where we sort of look at the overnights, we sort of know they're irrelevant, we're still dictated by the overnights and that success. So we haven't yet worked out what our metrics of success are clearly in the way that we've thought. And I think that makes the conversation quite complicated.
Also, but even though the ratings are irrelevant, you'll still lose your job if they continue to be really that bad.
I think one of the issues is that the commissioners themselves are under pressure, aren't they? I mean, and there are particular issues. I think, I'm not sure risk is always logical, I suppose, was the question I would put to you, because I think sometimes people who are not in the prevailing demographic can be just perceived as innately more risky. And just thinking about the gender issue for a moment, there was some research which was showing that women making their second or third film are regarded as riskier than men making their first film. So there can be some anomalies. I think this was a Hollywood sort of thing. But what would you say on the subject of risk, Clare, in terms of people's perception of making that leap with somebody that maybe they don't know as well? Because I think the point is well made about sort of keeping to the tried and tested, but that will never change anything if we keep to the tried and tested.
I think that women often get there's some really brilliant female producers, and it's really hard often for female producers to get that first break as a director, and then even once you've done that, the second and third jobs are really hard to get as well. And I don't know really what the answer is, other than to say that there needs to be a better acceptance that, like Tom was just saying, that idea that you should support in a way that's different if you've got less experience, and that perhaps understanding that less experience might bring a different voice. I mean, I went to an event where the BBC showed clips over the last year, and the risk that if we don't do these sort of things is that everything that we churn out is the same, and we're sort of saying the same thing in the same slightly different way over and over again, and then you look around in the room and the demographics are, obviously to particular type of demographic, and so yeah.
The male directors, sorry to cut you, Clare, but shouldn't some of the male directors be pushing their female producers to direct rather than keeping them as quite helpful producers? Because, do you not think that we're often seen as organisers, women?
Yeah, really good with people.
Real people person, really organised.
Really organised, yeah. Not technical.
Say more about the not technical, though, because I think sometimes a lot of women I know themselves are put off by, oh gosh, I don't know about lenses or something, and thinking that it's a highly technical job as opposed to all the other things, the organisation, the people skills, they're having an eye, they be able to have a story composition and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this sort of directing so much more than just knowing which prime lens you need to put on the front of the camera, and that that women, by the fact that you're a woman, doesn't mean that you can't be technical, and also that you can't shoot really well. It's sort of there's a sort of an expectation that if you're a male director, you're going to be able to shoot brilliantly, apropos of being male, but it's obviously not true.
I think you said it earlier, that, it's really true. Women massively undersell themselves and men massively oversell themselves. And when you're interviewing people for, the next film you're making or the next series you're making, it's amazing how, you'll get a male AP who's been an AP for 3 weeks and they're like ready to direct. And you ask them what they're shooting like, and their shooting is like amazing. Amazing. And then you can ask a woman what their shooting is like, and generally speaking, and I don't want to, but it is generally speaking, you'll find women will say it's okay, because they won't boast, they don't have that need to. Yeah, they won't lie. Yeah. And Rita. It's amazing how often those amazing blokes are lying.
But we're in an industry where confidence is often taken as a proxy for talent, aren't we? Which is a real issue. That if you're confident, you must be backing it up.
But I think that comes back to the class thing as well. I think if we're talking about the difference between being from a working class background versus a sort of not working class background, I think confidence is genuinely the key. And also what Jaimie's saying is absolutely right. You are going off the back of a CV and an interview, and a face-to-face interview. And so how you present yourself and all the things we talked about, the social codes of how you behave in an interview, what you say you're good at or not good at, all those things suddenly come into play in that interview room, because that's the way we hire people.
I want to open it up to the floor now and to get your thoughts, your particular questions, if you would. And I'm particularly interested, we've talked a lot about some of the difficulties, the issues that there are if you don't fit in the prevailing demographic. But what have you seen work? You know, what would have helped you in your careers that you don't feel is there? How can we help tackle this problem? Because it's easy to go into the kind of slough of despond with this particular topic, but we want to inspire people. We want people to sort of think, yeah, these are the things we need to do more of. Lady in the front row. Have we got a roving mic? I think we do. Just hang on, it's coming to you. This lady here.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. I'm a student. I just finished university. I'm 21, and everything you've said about people trying to get into the industry was true. So you all gave great advice, but I was wondering if there's some key advice that you can give people that want to get into the industry that is not just the regular get internships, put your foot at the door, and all of those things that you see online. What is your main advice to be able to get into the industry?
So original advice, sorry.
Do you actually make any of your own, have you started filming your own things?
Yes, during university I was able to get involved in different projects.
I mean, it's worth definitely, if you say you want to make a film for Channel 4, it's definitely worth watching the output and having an opinion about the output, and also making your own stuff. And then finding a production company that makes the sort of stuff that you want to make. And if you're able to tell them why you like that output, you're probably more likely to be invited in. I mean, running's another good way of doing it, because with the intense environment, you get really noticed if you're good. And people are then keen to push you up to the next level.
And do your research. Like, research is key in this game. So last week someone pitched an idea to me for 7 o'clock on Channel 4 midweek. That's when we have our news. So, like, that's not going to get made. It's just, and I'm not going to keep reading it because they obviously haven't done their research. So you just do your research, because if there's a wealth of information on the interweb.
Would it work at 6 o'clock?
Maybe at 6:30. Yeah, there you go. 7:15.
Yeah.
There's so much information on the internet that you can find about who you're pitching to, and you have to tailor your pitches accordingly.
To echo what Rita said, in particular, I think you should be looking at which programs you really like, who made those programs, so not just broadcast programs, but anything you see on YouTube, shorts, etc., who made them, so who was the director, what was the company who made it, email that company directly, say why you liked it, find out who the MD is or the head of the company, email them, not the info at email, direct. Say what you liked about their film, attach your own films if you've got them. You will get a reply if it's not generic. If you send a sort of, just random, hello, I want to work in television to 100 companies, you might get 1 or 2 responses. If you send a bespoke, thoughtful, with conviction, I really like this, you will get a reply.
And spell the name correctly. Do you know how irritating it is when people email me and I can't spell my name correctly? I think it's really rude, actually, because just Google it. I'll be there somewhere, and you can just email it. It's just change a few letters. Seriously.
You should get over it. It's all right.
I'm so
it's all right.
I haven't had any lunch. I'm really hungry.
There's a lady over here, the stripy top.
Hi, thank you very much. Tom mentioned the Grayson Trust. I'm the actual outreach manager for the Grayson Trust, so if anyone wants to come and talk to me, I'm more than happy to. We'll be recruiting in January for our scheme again. A couple of points, really. Speaking personally, I think it's really important to have role models and people that you can go and talk to. I wish when I was a young person, like lots of the people here in the room, I wish there was somebody that had told me things that I know now. And that's why I think mentoring is really important, and that's why I mentor, and that's why I promote mentoring in the Grayson Outreach Programme. I think we should have a note of optimism, and perhaps some of the broadcasters, the commission editors, to talk about this, but we haven't mentioned the fact that Channel 4 are moving out of London. Commissioning in terms of Channel 4 and BBC, half their budgets are going to be outspent, hopefully, if we can find out what the criteria is, about being spent out in the regions. Should there be an onus on on the broadcasters commissioning in the regions, in those regional production offices, whether they're going to be new ones or whether they're going to be outposts of London-established production companies, where they should be given a task to actually recruit locally. Because otherwise we're just going to have a toing and froing of talent from London, and we're not going to build up critical mass. The talent pipeline has to start in the regions.
There is already at Channel 4, really. So, in just daytime, and for example, over 70% of the stuff we make at daytime comes from the nations and regions, and it's not just like satellite offices. It's actually made in Cardiff at their studios, or it's made in Glasgow from that office. So, you're absolutely right. So, optimism. We have to be optimistic because we are doing great things, and we're in a far better position than we were. I think on screen we're doing far better.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Have you got... Yeah.
Creative Skill Set, if you haven't heard of them, you need to look them up. They've just published 2 career maps. One, that's a career map about editorial and production. People don't know the difference. Another about technical and craft skills. So Creative Skill Set, if you look at Hive, it's spelled IIVE, and go to resources, you'll find them there.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to go to this side of the room. Another lady in stripy top.
Hello. First, I want to answer your question about what does seem to be working, and I think one of the things is having directors that encourage their APs and shooting APs, both technically and editorially, because I think sometimes on working on a program, it's easy to forget that the person beneath you is looking to learn and to get feedback, and it's incredibly helpful, even just watching rushes back with the director at the end of the day, which I know sometimes is impossible because it's so busy, but it's incredibly helpful because you're staring down a lens and everything goes by so quickly and you forget what you've shot, but going through it with someone who can give you productive feedback is helping a lot. I guess my question is, it's slightly disheartening, I'm sort of at shooting AP producer level, when a young male director comes out and makes his first great film, it gets nominated for a BAFTA, there seems to be a lot of hype around that person, and it doesn't seem to work the same way for women or people of colour who are making their first films. And how can we, hype these new directors who have made brilliant films? Other than, it seems like perhaps a BAFTA is enough, but it doesn't seem to be quite that way. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Any thoughts on that?
I think it's true. I don't know why we're not celebrating. I think the problem is we need more women and people of colour doing it in the first place. And then once we get them, we should be making sure that everyone knows about them. I don't know why the boys seem to get name-checked all the time. It's a really bad habit.
Well, society.
We need to break it.
And also the person themselves needs to boost themselves and be quite sort of loud and proud and take up media opportunities as well. I would say it works from both directions.
Yeah, you should always act as if you are the best person in that room to make that film, even if you don't believe it. Just fucking, just turn it on for that hour and just be like, this is amazing, you're going to miss out if you don't take me on. And it's hard because men have been doing that for centuries, and there are a lot of average white... Look, I love white people. Don't get me... some of my best friends are white, but there are a lot of average white men at the top of the tree who have got there because they act as if. So sometimes you just got to play the game as well. And it's not enough, obviously, but, it's a start.
I do think we have to check each other as well. I think Rita's totally right, because on the one hand, I was about to say we have commissioned films from loads of brilliant female directors, and it's true, we have. But then I've been in meetings recently where indies have talked about who might possibly direct this film, and they name the 5 or 6 obvious white men that I'm sure they're suggesting to Rita at the same time. And I think we have a responsibility as commissioners and as independent producers to go, hang on, when we're thinking about who, that list of who needs to be broad. It can't just be the 6 obvious blokes.
And you hear that in both directions as well.
Totally,
you hear
in both
that production
directions.
companies are putting up diverse talent that's rejected.
Absolutely
and so on.
right.
So I think in both directions. Chap with the glasses over here.
I've been coming to Docfest for 16 years, and I've been coming to this panel for 16 years. And I wonder if we allow for the possibility that self-regulation is failing and has failed and will continue to fail, what would be the statutory, regulatory, sort of compulsory moves that could be placed on the industry to actually genuinely change things?
I mean, I just feel that wouldn't work. And I think that statutory or regulatory, basically what you're talking about, people are going to be doing it for the wrong reasons then. And I just think that it has been tried in the past. And I thought it was interesting when Lenny Henry talked about ring fencing, because that's doable, that's practical. Lots of people have issues with that, but the idea that there would be commissioning money that, in the same way that nations and regions is ring fenced, there's commissioning money that has to be specifically allocated to BAME or to another metric that isn't being represented. But I think if you get into the punishment or the kind of the chastising kind of frame of mind, I think actually what I really think is we don't have time to do that, because, like you say, these panels happen every year, and the thing that will change things very quickly. And I'm an optimist, even though I sound like a cynic. I'm an optimist when I say that it can change overnight, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about risk. And one man's risk or one woman's risk is another one's no-brainer. So, but no one's done it yet.
Do you know what?
Well, they need to do it.
But can I just say one thing? Because I think.
Let's play my game. Okay, we agree for a second that we do need to do something, and we do need to change something statutorily. What would it be?
The argument for that, I suppose, playing devil's advocate, is just to make sure that the makeup of your office is like the makeup of the country in its basest form. But the real change is going to come from people like Rita and people like Tom, who are key decision makers. And the more key decision makers that are from working class northern backgrounds, who are from black backgrounds, BAME, disabled backgrounds, the more key decision makers from those backgrounds, they're the ones who are really going to inflict more change in the long term.
So are you suggesting representation on boards and in senior management needs to be addressed?
Always, but not statutory.
They are being. I mean, one of the things I would say is, because obviously I think we probably talked. Everybody on this panel have talked about the challenges around diversity. I also think I sort of feel I ought to say that I think when you say nothing has changed, I don't actually agree with that. I don't agree with that. I mean, I'm not going to be. I don't want to bore everyone by citing all the things that the BBC has done in the past year and all the things that we've done. But you've been coming here for 16 years. You said
nothing has changed. Lots has changed.
But you said it's not.
We're still with the same problems.
Okay, sorry, forgive me. I think you said it's not working. I think in lots of places. Do I think it's perfect? No. Do I think there's loads of cause for optimism? Yes. Do I think some things? Am I seeing really significant shifts? Yes, I am.
I'm getting lots of hands in the air, so I need to move it on. So, chap right at the back with a beard.
Hi guys, I'm Hassan. I'm actually I'm a science teacher and going to science docs. And one of the things that I realised when I taught students about TV, I teach in an inner city school in Sheffield, is that from a very young age they just don't think it's possible. They don't have that interaction with the kind of interaction with people or the skill sets kind of taught to them about what TV is and how diverse the TV industry is, and it's not just about being a presenter, but producing, directing. I was wondering if there is any outreach programs that teachers like myself can get in touch.
We do have a department called For Talent that's doing quite a lot of work with students, 16 to 18-year-olds and postgraduates. So they are going out around the country to find these people, but you should try and get in touch with them to find out where they're going next, when they're going to be near you next. It's For Talent on the website.
There are also good schemes like in games as well, Young Game Designer that BAFTA runs as well, if you've got people who are interested in the games aspect. Chap here.
Hello. I started in TV on the Creative Access scheme, which is for black and minority ethnic people at the entry level, and I think it's had a really great impact, and lots of people are still working and doing well. And since I started in my career, I definitely feel like some opportunities have come to me because of my ethnicity, and I think that will continue to happen. I think most of the time I feel pretty fine with that and don't worry about it too much. But I wondered if anybody in the panel had experienced that and could talk a little bit about how they kind of deal with it and manage that.
So advantages that might have come.
Advantages and disadvantages.
Advantages. How your background might have helped you.
I mean, I think it's good that people come to you if they want you to make films about the world that you've lived. Yeah. But what they can't do is expect you not to be able to make films about anything else. So I do worry that very few male directors are making films about gangs. I do think that they should also maybe make a film, a cookery programme or something. I just think that whilst it's good to be able to use your own voice in a world that you might know, that you shouldn't allow commissioners or execs to pigeonhole you and think that that's the only thing you can do.
And that's the same for companies as well. Companies don't want to be pigeonholed. You know, companies want to exist in a space and have a specialist subject area, but they want to be able to make other stuff as well, surely. And I think so. It can be both a blessing and a curse, because if you've got to pay the bills, then I completely get it. If someone calls me up and like, oh, we're making a music doc, and I know that you, because I used to be a garage MC, I know that you used to be in music, and can you come and do it? And I've done sort of 10 or 15 of those other ones already. Even though I don't really want to be doing it, I know that I've got to pay the bills. But there needs to be a kind of payoff where you see something. So when Rita was talking earlier about how her sort of mentor saw something in her that wouldn't necessarily have been seen otherwise.
Yeah, they didn't just confine me to black music. I went on to do a documentary about Francis Bacon. That was my next credit. So they were open-minded, I guess.
They've got time for one last question. So who's most desperate to answer? There's a lady down here.
Hi, thank you all. I just wanted to ask a question in regards to conversations around class. One thing that I've sort of noticed, because I'm at the beginning of my career and I'm not London-based, a lot of the groups that sort of connect me to other people in the industry are online. And the sort of groups that are led by people of colour or by queer people have the conversations of class come up a lot, but sort of groups that are based all around being working class are often led by or created by white working class people, and rarely do they discuss issues of race, for example, or disability. So it's that sort of trend of when people are talking about class, they are not factoring in the intersectionalities of other identities and how those play into working in this career. So any sort of advice about how going forward we can have more conversations about class that factor in all those other identities would be. Thank you.
Wow, good question.
Do you want to answer it?
Allies. You need allies in this game. What you need people like Tom, who's a perfect example of a white working class kid from the north of England who's done good, to be able to sit on this panel and say, you know what, it's not good enough, and we want more black people, and we want more Asian people, we want more disabled people. And you need strong white allies, essentially. And so you need to connect with them on a way that, it might be uncomfortable, but there are people there who genuinely care, black, white or other, who want to see a fundamental shift and change in what the output of television is.
I agree with that, because I also think one of the dangers of a panel like this, and I think hopefully we've just about managed to avoid it, is that someone like Rita talks about BAME, someone like me talks about class, someone like Clare talks about being a female director, as though those things are entirely separate issues and don't cross over with each other. Of course they cross over with each other, and I think it's as important for everybody sitting here that we do. It's as important to me that we do something about female directors as it is about class representation. What I would hate is if the conversation becomes very, very siloed, which is a BBC word, but siloed, so it's sort of like, I'm the person who's here to worry about working class people, I'm the person who's here to worry about being... That is not going to sort this out. This isn't a ranking system of diversity issues.
Absolutely.
We should be worrying about inclusion in general.
Okay, so on the note that we should all be worried about inclusion in general, I want to call things to a halt. I want to say a massive thank you to the panel who've really brought their own experience to this in a really impressive and articulate way, and to thank you to all of you for coming and to Channel 4 for sponsoring. Thanks very much indeed.